Hey everybody, it's Jennifer. I just want to go over what we're going to do this week, and I want to teach you how to measure your objects off of each other. So in the last video I posted for you, we looked at how to sight the angles around a still life object. So this week I want to show you the measuring part. So again, last week was sighting, this week is measuring. So what we want to do is we are going to need our newsprint, our stick of charcoal, and our kneaded eraser. So make sure you have all three of these things when you start working this week. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to recap and go over how to sight the angles around a still life object before we start measuring. So if you remember from the last video, what I showed you is we are actually looking for the imaginary line, which is the angles that go around the whole still life object. So I'm going to go ahead and put my sight lines for this still life object on my newsprint. So I'm going to hold up my charcoal and I'm going to close one eye. And then I'm going to go around the piece and look for the angles. Now this one, I have this angle on the side of the box. The next angle is from the corner of the box to the bottom of the ball. Another straight up and down, reminding myself the edge of the ball is there. And then the long angle back up to the top. Okay, that gives me the sight lines for this still life object. And this week what we want to do is we want to start putting our shapes in. So we always start with the largest shape. And the largest shape in my still life object is the cone. So the first thing I want to do is I want to put the cone in. Now I know roughly where the cone should be, the tip of it, right back up here. And what I want to do is I want to take my charcoal and I want to sight the angle on the cone. Now you want to make sure that you draw your cone big enough. You don't want your cone to be too small. And you don't want your cone to be too fat, like a fat triangle shape. Try to avoid that. So what we want to do is, this is the only place that we actually guess. When we are putting the first shape in, we are trying to figure out how tall or big it should be in the space. And we can get some clues based on the still life. If I look right here and think about this angle that I put in from here, the corner of the box to the bottom of the ball, I can think about roughly how far the bottom of the cone sits within that line. So make sure you put a rounded bottom on the cone if you're working with foam shapes like I am. So this is my first shape. And all of the other shapes that I add from now on will be based off the measurements of this shape. So the next shape I'm going to put in is the box. The box is, let's see, one, two, I see two sides of the box and I see the top of the box. So the first thing I want to do is I want to think about what kind of box I'm actually seeing. And I'll do a separate video on boxes because boxes are tricky. So once I think about in my head roughly where it should go on my page and I think about what kind of box I have, the next thing I need to do is I need to measure how many of those boxes would fit in my cone shape, or roughly how many of those box heights would fit in the cone shape. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So from a distance, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my fingers or the charcoal and I'm going to measure one corner of the box. And then visually what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how many of that height fit into my cone shape. So let's see how I would do this. I can do it with a piece of charcoal or I can do it with my fingers. So the first way is with my fingers. I can literally hold my fingers up, take the measurement, move it over to the cone and literally look and see 1, 2, 3 and a little bit is what I've got. Or I can do my charcoal, take my charcoal and do the same thing. I can put my thumb at the bottom of where the box is and measure it that way. 1, 2, 3, and a little bit.
So I know that the height of the box in my drawing should be 3 and a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to break my box into that shape. So here I have 1, 2, 3, and a little bit on top. So I'll make that a little darker for you so you can see it. So this tells me the height of my box is this tall in my drawing. That's it. So what I do now is I move this height where I think it needs to go. And in my drawing, it would go right here because I actually have the sight lines for it marked out. So I'm going to put that right here and mark it. So now what I'm going to do is put the other sides on my box. And I can use my charcoal to measure the angle or sight the angle on the bottom of the box here. It is not this line, unfortunately. It goes inside that line a little bit. So I'll actually use my charcoal and I'll sight it. Okay. It's more like this. Now my box height, each corner should be about the same height. So I move this over here. Okay, move this one. I already have this angle because it's my sight line. So what I can do is I can actually measure see if it's the same amount, the same height as the width on this one, and it is. Take the same height and move it over. Now to do the top of a box, parallel lines stay parallel. So in this case, it'll be fairly easy for me to add the top of the box. Make this a little straighter. So parallel lines are going to stay parallel. This line comes over here. This line comes over here. Now I'm going to take my nude eraser and clean this up just a little bit so you can see the top of the box. And then what I'm going to do is check to make sure that it's actually roughly in the right place. And in my composition, wow, this corner is exactly where it needs to be, but it needs to line up with this one to be straight. So I'm going to fix that. And then this will come over here. And I think I'm a little long right here, so I'm going to trim that up just a little bit. Okay, now my box is exactly where I see it. This angle got a little off. Now the next shape I'm going to add is the ball. So with the ball, I'm going to do the same thing. Visually from a distance, I'm either going to use my fingers or the charcoal to measure the height of the ball against the cone. So let's see what we get. 1, 2, 3. I'll use my fingers. 1, 2, 3. So let me show you again what I'm doing from a distance. So from a distance, I am taking my fingers or the charcoal and I'm measuring this height, and then I'm looking at it against this shape. And I realize that it is 3 when I measure it out. So that means I'm going to come over to the cone here, the other side of the cone that doesn't have hatch marks on it already, and I'm going to divide it into 3. So it's going to be slightly taller than the box lines. And let's make sure I'm right on this. 1, 2, 3. So I've got 3. Sometimes that's actually the hardest part when you first start doing it. So do not get frustrated. Make sure you take the time to get that right, because that's going to determine your measurement. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this measurement and I'm going to move it over to where I think it needs to be. I'm also going to pay attention to any negative space that I might need. So for my still life, the way I see it, there's a little bit of negative space, which is the space between the objects. And I know it's supposed to be down here because I already sighted that. Now, with the ball, it's pretty easy. The ball or the sphere is the same height as it is the width. So I'm going to mark this. Now, it's always hard to draw a perfect circle. So what I recommend doing is drawing a bunch of lines and then taking your kneaded eraser and cleaning it up. So here we go. I'm going to draw a bunch of lines, and then somewhere in here I'll have a circle that works for me. So now what I'm going to do is take my kneaded eraser and I'm going to clean up the lines until I have something that I like for a ball or a sphere. Okay, so now I have all three of my shapes in here and they are correct. And I used the tallest shape that I put in to measure all of the other shapes so I would get them right. I also used my sight lines to help me with my placement. I'm going to make these a little darker. The other thing you want to do is you want to look and see if there's any table lines or anything, because it'll help make it look like your objects are on a space or in a space. So I'm going to look back behind this space and I'm going to draw in a table line. Let's make it a little higher on this side. Okay, now what you're going to do, take your kneaded eraser and I want you to erase all the extra stuff that you don't need. So we're going to erase all the sight lines. And again, you won't get them all off, so it's okay. It's charcoal on newsprint. It's part of the process. So it's nice to have those showing through a little bit, but you want to get rid of as much of it as you can. Get rid of all these measurement lines. Okay, and now what's left is my three shapes and a table line. Okay, so let's go over this again. What I want you to do this week is I want you to set up a nice, easy still life. I want you to use your sight lines that we covered last week and how to do that. So find the outside sight lines for the whole still life. Then what I want you to do is go back in using what you just learned in this video, which is measuring. So you are going to measure one object off of the other to make sure that you get them in the right space and the right height. And the eraser, I want you to use it. They won't look good at first, and that's okay. The first time you put a shape in, it probably will not be right, especially for beginners. Don't be scared of the eraser. Don't be scared of totally erasing everything and putting it back in where it needs to go. This is your chance to learn how to do this part, so you want to make sure that we get this part right. Once your shapes are blocked in, then we'll start doing value in another video. And if your shapes aren't right, it doesn't matter how good you are at the value, it just won't work. So let's take the time this week to really look at how to get the measuring right in still life. If you have any questions, of course, don't hesitate to email me. Have a great week.